So, hiring the right people is crucial for any organization's success. Yet, many companies still rely on completely outdated methods that simply don't work. Did you know that the traditional interviews, often the cornerstone of any good hiring process, are shockingly poor predictors of on the job success? There is some research showing that they have a predictive validity of only around 14%, meaning that they're worse than a coin flip. That's a costly gamble. But what if there was a better way? What if you could use science to identify and hire those elusive top performers? In this episode, we are going to dive into the science of hiring, exploring evidence-based strategies that actually work. We will be tackling some critical questions. Is there a universal definition of a top performer? And what does science tell us about it? Why are traditional interviews so flawed? What are the core principles of behavioral interviewing? How can organizations effectively implement it? So let's get rid of this ditch, or let's get ready to ditch this guesswork. This episode is your guide to building a team of a true performers. And to discuss that, I have my guest. My guest is David Cohen, a true thought leader in a bit of a contrarian in the field, which I absolutely love. David isn't just talking the talk. He's been walking the walk for over 30 years, founding DS Cohen and Associates, and dedicating his careers to helping organizations become truly exceptional places to work. He's an award-winning speaker. He's an author of many books. And by the way, this time we need to speak about his upcoming book. And he's also a consultant, known for challenging conventional wisdom and offering innovative and practical solutions. David, a pleasure to have you with me, really.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure of my pleasure, believe me. Glad to be here.
David, we it is true that people are spending a good amount of money, not only to hire directly, but sometimes asking a third person to hire a good talent. And I will tell you what, I still remember, I was telling you about my life in Dubai. In Dubai, I got to know how much we were paying my previous company, my corporate world, how much they were paying for hiring a mid-level um, person. And it was close to $30,000. So, and that was a lot of money. And very often, this person was not a good fit either in terms of the cultural fit with the company or either in terms of the skills that were required to be successful in this workplace. So very often, after 2 years, the company didn't know what to do with this person. And then, of course, there was the political discussion about what do we do with this guy? Uh, but I wanted to ask you directly, is there any common definition of what is a top performer? So how can companies align and say, oh, this is a good guy?
That's a great question because while there's a lot of literature and a lot of information on the internet that says here are the characteristics of a top performer, I don't believe there are. Every company is unique in its own way. It's interesting, in Anna Karenina in the beginning, Tolstoy writes, every happy family is happy in its own way, and every unhappy family is unhappy in similar ways. I look at it this way. Every happy organization is happy in its own way, and every unhappy organization is unhappy in very similar ways. So I kind of flip it because this is what's happened. We've gotten used to an homogeneous definition of what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. But organizations have a culture, and cultures are based on values. And values are different, even if we think they're the same. My example that I like to use, which you'll understand having worked in the Gulf region, is there's a difference between respect in so many different ways around the world.
Mhm.
For instance, when it comes to work and family relationships, respect in Asia is deference to those people who are older. Respect in Asia is if my boss says something, then I have to agree with it, even if I disagree with it. Otherwise, I will cause him to lose face, and that's not good. And then it's bad for me. And then we have a breakdown of communications. Respect in the Gulf region is different. Respect in the Gulf region, because of its tribal background, is we have to socialize ideas with everybody before we bring them forward.
Mm.
Respect in United States in particular is if I have a different idea than my boss, I just raise my hand, maybe not even raise my hand, and in the meeting just say, I think there's a different way of doing it. I think that's a stupid approach. Which, if I didn't do it and they found out later I had a different idea, they'd be angry at me because my idea could have been better, and therefore I withheld good information. But that same behavior in the Gulf region would say, you're rushing things. You haven't talked to other people about it. And in Asia, we get you fired. And well, they never fire people in Asia. They just move them to other positions. So might wind up being the garage attendant, because they're not going to fire you, but they're going to demote you and put you aside. So the fact is that we make certain assumptions that there's right and wrong based on our own belief system. So what works for one company doesn't necessarily work for another.
Mm.
So every organization has its own personality, owns its own characteristics, and every organization needs to understand that they have to identify the behavioral attributes that work for them, that are right for their values, in order for them to hire a top performer. Because if I'm working in an organization that's bureaucratic or autocratic, and I come in with a innovative, creative idea who thinks that I should be able to do this right away, I'm going to get pushed back with words like, well, we've done that before, or why are you making waves? But I could have been the best employer in the world. One of the examples happened very early in my consulting career with a chemical manufacturer I was working with, and I was doing the profile for what is a good employee at this plant. And we were talking and talking and talking, and somebody said that the difference between our plant and the plant across the street is this. We used to have a woman here who was very intelligent, she never graduated high school, but she was very smart and very learned, and she was very physical. She could do whatever a guy can do in the plant, and she was well respected, well organized, but they felt she was too aggressive, and they felt that she said things which were sort of different than the way we did them traditionally, and they let her go. She's now the general manager of the plant across the street, and they're killing us. So she was right for the plant across the street. She wasn't right. So I don't think that there's a one size fits all. I think that we have to understand, and even if the attributes for a job, let's say a job as a salesperson, you have all the attributes, but then you have a problem, because if you don't have the values for the company you're working at, people aren't going to talk to you. You're going to annoy people. You become, but you get rewarded, you get recognized because you're bringing in great results, but nobody wants to work with you.
Indeed.
So there's a very careful, you need to be able to define what is your uniqueness? What is your secret sauce, as one of my clients called it, that makes your company successful? And if you can find your secret sauce, you have a roadmap to hire successfully, if you know how to hire and don't use traditional interviews.
Mm. And maybe that's one of the major errors that are made by hiring third parties companies, is that they focus only the job description, what needs to be done, the skills that needs to be done, and probably the advantages to acquire, to bring customers, like if you are a salesperson, to the company, but they don't act on the understanding of the values. And as you said, it's almost like marriage. It's about chemistry at the end.
It
It's
is
not like
chemistry.
you are super intelligent, super beautiful, then you are awesome for me. No, you might not be awesome for me. And it's not about your beauty or about your intelligence. It's about the chemistry that we may have, the common vision that we may have about life, about dealing with relations and so on. That's something that is quite important and almost forgotten in some cases.
Well, it's forgotten in a lot of cases because there's such a need by the hiring manager to fill a role, to put a warm bum in that seat real fast because the rest of the staff is being overworked because of the vacancy in that seat. So what they do is they just hire the person who has that technical skill that can, quote, do the job.
Yeah.
Well, they can do the job technically,
Mm,
but they can't necessarily do the job correctly.
mm,
Correctly means with the right behavior. So just because you made the sale, I'll give you another example. I was working with a brokerage organization, and um, they had a gentleman who was the general manager of one of their remote locations, and he always brought in more money, uh, and he was on the CEO's annual golden team, and was, he was always celebrated. And the problem is that when he called the head office to get something done, and it was usually an entry level employee in what they call the cage, the back room, to get something out, and he'd call after 4:30, even though the rule was 4:30 means the next day it gets done. He would yell and scream that he's too important and they got to get it done for him. And he threatened to fire this person, even though he couldn't fire them. And because there were an entry level person making minimum wage, and usually female in the back room, they'd start to cry. And we worked on putting what their values were, we put together what the behaviors were. And the new CHRO said to the CEO, if I get one more person crying, I'm going to quit. He has got to follow the behaviors of the organization. And the CEO told him that, but he didn't care. And one day the CEO walked, the HR person with the manager for the back room, and the individual was upset, came in and said, this is what he did. If we're going to live our values, we got to stand by him. You got to fire him. And they fired him.
mm,
They walked him out of the office, in the remote office. The more interesting part is the person who they replaced him with actually increased the revenue bottom line, because he was also treating customers that way. They came to him and they asked, why are you still working with him if you didn't like him? Because he was making us money. And after all, he's a broker. That's what he's supposed to do. But we were always annoyed the way he treated us, or the way he treated the women that worked with us. So we never reinvested enough of the money back in that was making, we take it out and put it somewhere else. But
mm.
this new guy, we really like him. Now we're reinvesting the money back in the organization. And I can tell you almost every time that I've seen this, where you get rid of this person, you success happens. Employees don't leave. Another organization we worked with was in the hospitality business, and the VP of marketing had changed the hotel chain to be much more successful, much more occupancy rates had gone up. And we were working on the values, and I walked away from it and said, unless you fire the VP of marketing, your values will never take place. And he said, I can't do that. He's making me so much money. We increased our occupancy rate. We did this, we did that. And I said, well, after you let him go, let me know. I won't get into it's just bad hotel behavior.
Mm.
And about 6 months later, he called me up and he said, I fired him. And something very interesting happened. He said two of his best people came into me and said, thank you for firing him because I like working here, but I was interviewing for other jobs because I couldn't work with him anymore. And I said, I told you that 6 months ago. You didn't listen to me. And so every time I do the values exercise with the executive group, I always give a caveat to the CEO. You might find somebody on your executive team, while they're very good at their job technically, they're very bad at the behaviors in the organization. And by keeping them there, you're making your behaviors either hypocritical, so you get cynical employees, or aspirational, which means you tell employees this is the right way of doing things, but you won't do it. And so you get cynical employees. So you got to live them once you state them. So the way I look at it is this way. So imagine a 2x2 chart, because every consultant has to have a 2x2 chart. So if you put on the left-hand axis, the vertical axis, you put behaviors of the values. So the higher you go up, the more demonstration of the behaviors. On the bottom side, on the vertical, you put the results. So the more you move to the right, the higher the results. So in the upper right-hand corner, you got people who are really good at the behaviors and really good at getting results. Those are easy. Those are the stars of your organization. In the bottom left-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner of the stars, the bottom left-hand corner is what I call deadwood. They don't get results. They don't live the behaviors. Why are they still working there? Those are people that just shouldn't have ever been hired. And if they were, you do them a favor if you let them go, because they can find happiness someplace else. So that leaves the upper left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner. In the upper left-hand corner, you have people that live the values. Everybody loves them. They're not getting results. I call those keepers. Why do I call them keepers? Because it's harder to live the values than it is to learn how to get results. I can teach them the skill and knowledge. It's a hard time. It takes a long time to change their behavior. So, I always joke to say, if you let one of those people go, it's like shooting Bambi's mother. Everybody in the organization is going to get up with you because they love them. So that leaves you the bottom right-hand corner. These are the people that make the CEO real happy, make the board happy, make shareholders happy, because they're making lots of money. But every time the phone will ring on Friday afternoon and that person's name comes up, people let it go to voicemail because they know they're going to get yelled at, they're going to get abused, they're going to be told to work extra on the weekend. They just don't like that person. I call that person a virus. And the more often they get promoted, the more often they get rewards or recognition, they win prizes, the more you tell your organization, forget about the values, they don't really care. It's about the money. And when organizations put money before people, they always lose. And that's why when I do exercises around values and somebody says we value profits, I say profit is a byproduct of doing business correctly. It's not a value unto itself, because then you allow a Machiavellian type of environment to exist and anything goes and you can't control the inmates. They'll do anything because you're going to reward them for profits. You got to reward them for doing the right thing in a difficult time. And that's what values tell you. Values are your corporate code of conduct. Everybody has this code of ethical conduct, and you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But you really don't need it if you express your values correctly and celebrate those who live the values. You send a clear message that regardless of the situation, this is the right way to behave. That's when you have a good fit for your organization. That's why in the new book, Selecting the Best, I talk about the idea of, if you can identify your authentic values, not your aspirational values, not the ones that when your employees see it on the website or see it on a chart on the wall or at reception, they kind of roll their eyes and say, I wish, right? Not those, your authentic values, what really makes the difference. The problem is, from my perspective, is there's two sets of values in every organization. There's overt and covert values. The overt values are what you have on that wall, and the covert values are what really drives you as a successful person in the organization. When the covert and overt are one and the same, you have a healthy organization. And it's not about, and here's the other thing, there's a lot of these value surveys that you can do. Let's measure your values. Let's find out what your values are. Well, I would say they are probably all prejudiced based on the person who designed the values, who designed the list, because that person has their own prejudice. And that's where we get, respect is defined one way. No, respect is defined at least four different ways. from we get from a global geographic location, from a geographical culture. We
Mm.
get different perspectives on what this word means. And it's very subtle because, for instance, if you're in the Gulf region, and I made this mistake, and if you cross your legs just a little bit wrong and you show the bottom of your foot, you've offended the whole audience.
That's true.
All right. Well, if you did that in America, nobody even notice. All right. But in America, that would be just I'm being comfortable. In the Gulf regions, I'm being disrespectful. My son was on vacation in Thailand and he made a hand gesture that got the merchant all upset and he didn't even know what he did. All right. So the idea is that there are subtle differences, even with companies that are across the street from each other, because the values are generated by the founder of the organization who hires family members and friends who commonly live the same values, and they pass that belief system on to the next generation, who pass it on to the next generation. So when companies come along and say, we're going to change the culture of our organization, I laugh because a value, the way I define it, is a strongly held belief that is emotionally charged, resistant to change, universally applied. It's emotionally charged, resistant to change, re, emotionally charged, resistant to change, and it's universally applied, which means what? It means that over time, I've defined this is the right way of behaving. To tell me I'm going to change my values because we're changing the culture of the organization is a misnomer because I'm not going to wake up in the morning and turn the light switch on and say, oh, today I have a new set of values. It took me 30, 40, 50 years to do that and many life experiences. I like this organization and work there because the way I live my values is more or less the way they live their values. And so when I see organizations say, we're going to become customer centric, I'll give you an example. I was working with the British Columbia Lottery Corporation, and they called me up one day and said, we got this scathing report from the government of British Columbia. We have to change our culture. And I said, okay, what does that mean? Oh, well, we got this wrong, we did this wrong, we're not staying up to date, we're not staying, there's competition from gambling places in the state of Washington across the border, which is easy for people to get to, and we're not making enough money, and we got to change our culture. So I said, so what's your culture? How do you define your culture now? Well, respect, honesty. So I said to them, wait a second, you're no longer going to be respectful and you're not going to be honest anymore. And you're the lottery corporation. Oh, no, no, we want to be respectful and we got to be honest. I said, you're not changing your culture, you're changing your business strategy. You got to go from scratch and win cards to casinos. That's not a change in culture. You're still going to be respectful at the casinos. You're still going to be honest at the casinos. And they said, oh, yeah. I said, well, you have to change is your behaviors. You have to change your behavior of innovation and accepting mistakes. You got to be honest about making mistakes instead of trying to hide them. You got to be this, you got to be that. So we redefined it, and they became the first of all the provinces in Ontario. They became the first province with online gambling because they changed not their values. They celebrated their values in changing it. That's why I always say that, I joke with organizations, I say, what you really want to do when you look at a values exercise is go back to the future. What made you great once can make you great again. And employees who've been here a really long time, they are nostalgic and reminisce how great this place used to be. And when you talk to them, it wasn't about the product and it wasn't about being successful. It was about the way they were treated. And if, the old adage is, I take care of my employees, so they take care of my customers. Well, if you take care of your employees, you treat them right, they'll take care of business for you, as long as you're clear about that. So when they talk about which comes first, strategy or culture, I believe that culture comes first and sets the foundation. And then strategy becomes a yin and yang. They feed off of each other. All
Indeed.
right. And when I change to a customer centric and we're going to go digital, we're going to use AI. That's not a change in culture. That's a change in a technology that you're using. You still have the same belief system when you're using that AI. So I go off on a rant on this, I know, but I don't see it the way a lot of consultants see it because they come in and we're going to change your culture. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it's even worse when you have big consulting firms, I won't name any, when they come in and they put on the websites and all this literature on, you have to get your board of directors involved in your culture. Wait a second, those are outside people. They have companies that have different cultures than you, different value systems. No, they're supposed to be reviewing and making sure that you're doing things right internally with your strategy and treating people according to the company's values, not their values. So, it's an internal thing and employees have to stand up with it. But then you get people like, um, I won't mention his name, certain people who, and who's a Canadian who works mostly in the US, and he talks about, for instance, Costco has now stood up against DEI. And he's raving and ranting how Costco shouldn't do that. No, Costco should do that. I just wrote an article on LinkedIn that says all these companies that have changed DEI, either they never were values that believed in equality and treating people fairly and equitably. They were lying about it all along, or they changed their values overnight, which means they weren't really a value. But
David,
Apple stuck with
that
it, Costco stuck with it, others have stuck with it
yeah.
because those are values. They're not going to change.
Mm. And that's true. And that drives me a little bit about what my tongue is burning to ask you something that is quite important also in the area of hiring. You were mentioning, for instance, about getting rid of bad fits for a workplace. You have mentioned the example of Costco and the DEI. Sometimes we do things because they are politically correct or we want to comply with whomever is in power at that time. So we do things for politics, David. Um, and in the area of getting rid of somebody that we hire because it was, let's say, a mistake, sometimes it's very difficult to get rid of that person because it was maybe the final approval came from somebody who was quite powerful in the senior management team, and he wants to hide the fact that he chose that person. So it looks like I'm talking about a topic that is not important, but it is important because I have seen people staying in place because nobody wanted to get rid of them because it was going to harm the reputation of somebody senior in the company.
Uh,
What should we do, David, about
okay,
it?
I have a colleague of mine that worked at one of the major banks here in Canada, and he did something that I think was brilliant. He, we were hiring a new position the bank had just created. And I created the profile and it was very specific, the behaviors around the business plan and the strategy. And it was supposed to bring in millions and millions of dollars if they put these account managers, personal banking in. This is around 20 years ago. And one of the very senior people in the bank had a relative that he wanted to get that position. So my friend, let's call my friend Randy, Randy interviewed this person according to behavioral interview, according to the values and everything else, and the person didn't fit. Now, Randy had courage. So Randy called up the executive vice president and said, I'm willing to hire the person as long as you sign the letter of agreement because you're going to fire that person when they don't work out. And let me tell you, this is why I don't think they're going to work out. And they didn't hire him. Now, what was interesting was a couple of weeks later, they got a message from one of the well-known CEOs in the automotive business who said, you discriminated against my wife because she was Asian, and she didn't get this promotion at the bank to an area we're moving, a new branch, because she's Asian and female. And the CEO called up Randy and said, make this go away. So Randy wrote to this guy and said, if you get a written permission from your wife for me to show you her interview results, I will gladly discuss why. But Randy did something very interesting. Instead of showing the results, he explained these are the behaviors we're looking for.
Mhm.
These are the reasons we're looking for these behaviors. Now, I'm going to show you, and he typed them out, 3 responses for 3 different answers, and you tell me which one you'd hire. And then I'll tell you if your wife was one of those people or not. 3 times he picked somebody, not one time was it his wife.
Wow.
And he says, you wouldn't hire your wife yourself. And the guy said, well done, and walked away. So here's the thing. If you have agreement on what are the criteria, and here's a problem with the criteria. Too many people look at the criteria as an outcome statement. They listen well. Well, listening well is the result of a behavior that you took. Takes action to resolve a customer's problem. Well, takes action to resolve a customer's problem might mean I put that customer in touch with the person who can handle it, and say to that customer, I'll call you in 3 days to find out if that person's responded. And if not, I take ownership of it and I'll follow up for you and resolve it. The other person says, I'll put you in touch with this person and figures it's not my problem anymore. It's out of my hands. So you have to define, listens could be allows other people to finish a thought before they respond. Well, you can observe that. You know that's happening. So when you ask a question, you can hear if the person does that or not. So you need to define what you're looking for very clearly, and then make sure everybody involved in the hiring process has exactly the same interpretation of that behavior. And then you're able to say, this person did this, and here's the evidence, or this person talked a lot and talked about good communications, but they never actually did it. And so now I can differentiate between my 2 candidates. So it's about how do you define what you're looking for? And that gets back to your first question. If I don't define, I always joke, I said, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're never going to find it.
Yes.
So you got to define what you're looking for so you can find it. And if you can find it, you're going to be successful. But if you don't, if you have 3 people interviewing the same person and all have a different definition of what success looks like, you're going to have 3 different arguments, and you're going to wind up with the hiring manager choosing that person they like the best. Not because they're a good fit, but they like them the best.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if the hiring manager wants to hire somebody and they have that same criteria, they say, well, in the interview, this person said this and that doesn't match. The hiring manager has got to agree to it. They have to understand. So that's why when I talk about coming together as a team to make a decision, it's never about voting. It's about consensus.
Mm.
Because the person who is the outlier who says, no, let's not hire them, might have the evidence in their interview notes that really prove this person shouldn't be hired, even though the other 2 said yes. And I've seen it happen where the hiring manager, one other person really wanted this person, and the other person says, well, let's review what they actually said and compare it to what we said. So you get away from the matching game of comparing one candidate to the other, because somebody's always going to shine, whether they are good or not, because they're good communicators, they use good body language, they look better than the other ones, they're taller than the others, et cetera, et cetera. So they went to a better school than the others, but they're not the best candidate. You got to compare every candidate against the criteria you're looking for, never against each other.
Mm. Indeed. By the way, I still remember that in your book, The Talent Edge, you were mentioning very often, and you have mentioned just before the behavioral interviewing. Uh, David, I don't want to misunderstand. What the hell is behavioral interviewing? Can you cheat the system in behavioral interviewing? Are you measuring wishing or doing with behavioral interviewing?
Okay, most organizations are wishing because they use hypothetical answers. What should you in this situation?
Yeah.
And you're hiring a college grad that just graduated first in their class and knows everything by heart, and they give you all the right answers. But yet they're not the best candidate because they don't have the right behaviors or they never did it.
Yeah.
So here's the problem with behavioral interviewing. Behavioral interviewing has always been the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And that is only partially true because I'm not the same person I was in high school. I'm not the same person I was at college. Before I went into consulting, I was a principal at a school. I was in education. I am not the same person I was behaviorally that I was when I was principal at school. And I can't say just because I did something 10 years ago in a story that I'm going to do it now. It is past behavior that is recent within the last 2 years and frequent multiple times. So if I have two good candidates and one has done it 18 months ago and did it right and it fit the behavior profile, and the other did it 18 months ago and 12 months ago and 3 months ago, the second one is more likely to do it for me. So it's about recency and frequency to differentiate. So in the scoring process that's in the new book, we actually have a anchored scale that allows you to understand the frequency and recency gets a higher score than have done it within 2 years and a much higher score than somebody did it a long time ago or knows theoretically what to do. Now, here's an interesting thing. The person who's done it frequently or recently, so they're going to go on to AI and they're going to, and I've done this, okay? Go on to AI and you ask AI, I'm going in for an interview tomorrow and they're going to ask me a behavioral question. And the behavioral question is going to yada, yada, yada. And AI gives you a beautiful answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So people are going to play that game. But here's my safety valve. It's what I call the honesty factor. So, Ivan, that's a very interesting answer. I really appreciate that answer. In fact, I would like to talk to the coworker you worked with on that project to validate that answer from their point of view. Please let me know how to get in touch with them. And please call them up to ask them when I should call them, that they're not at work on their private time, so it can't be a reference from work. Because in the United States and Canada, you can't give references. A lot of companies ban you from giving references that are work related. Now, when I call Ivan up, I don't say, Ivan, David said he did this, this, and this. Is it true? And Ivan knows that David said they're going to ask you about this. And even though I didn't do it, just tell them I did because that's the answer I give them. I'm going to say something else. I said, I heard you had a really hard time in solving, this delivery process in logistics. And I'd like to know, just for my own edification, how do you solve it? Because we're having the same problem. He tells me how they solved it. And it's exactly the same as I said.
Mm-hmm.
Then I kill him with the next question. So, Ivan, what was David's involvement? Oh, he was on vacation those 2 weeks. Well, thank you very much. End of interview. I don't have to ask any more questions. I don't have to ask, would you hire them again? Do you like them? Did they show up on time? I don't have to ask any of those questions, which could be misleading anyhow. So I asked a very simple question. How did it go? And what was the person's involvement? Now, I also want to be honest with the candidate. So in the introduction to the interview, I tell the candidate something to the effect of, during the process of getting us answers, you're going to give us answers that we really want to follow up on. And we know you gave your mother and your priest and your school teacher as references, because they're all going to give you great references. They love you. And that's great. That's okay. But we want references from people that are inside the story. So every once in a while, we might stop you and say, who is the person involved and how can we get in touch with them?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've already put the candidate on warning that AI answer ain't going to work anymore. They got to give me an answer that they can actually back up. And as soon as I stop the interview and ask them for that reference, they already know I better tell them stories that actually happened. And I better make sure that the AI answer is something that actually can get backed up, because otherwise, so that honesty question is about tearing it down. And in a behavioral interview, there's one word you have to ask 3 times. Because if you ask it more than that, it's annoying. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you do that? I did it because my boss told me to do it. Well, why you do it when your boss told you to do it and you just said it wasn't the right thing to do? Well, I'm not going to go against my boss. But yet we're looking for innovation, people that are going to go against their boss. So everything up to them was really good. Or if you ask it 3 times, you're going to, I call it like peeling away the onion. Your skill and knowledge questions are easy to understand. You can ask them to sit there and give you a demonstration. But the question is, why did you do that? So I'm going to get to your values. I did it because I believe you have to do the right thing, even if the company says it's the wrong thing to do. And that's why I'm leaving the company, because they told me I have to stop doing something I think is the right thing to do for my customers. Well, we don't like you doing the right thing for your customers either, so we're not going to hire you. Or that's exactly what we're looking for. So behavioral interviewing has a bad reputation because most behavioral questions are not behavioral. They have a question mark at the end. A behavioral question is a statement. It has a period at the end. Tell me about a recent time where you had a conflict with your manager, period. Not what did you do or why was there a conflict? Because in answering that question, you're going to tell me what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to tell me what happened without me guiding you. And maybe you did nothing. Maybe you just walked away. But when I say to you, how did you solve the problem? You know, you got to give me an answer that says you solved it. So behavioral interview questions, and I've looked on it, you can get like, over millions and millions of hits on Google for behavioral interview questions in less than a half a second. And when you look at them, I would say 80% are not behavioral. They're traditional questions. They're often good behavioral questions ruined by, so what'd you do? How did it turn out? Instead of just saying, tell me about a recent time where you had to make a choice between quality or quantity.
David, I want to ask you, so you have mentioned AI, and while you were talking, in fact, I was thinking, hell, is a lot of efforts to implement behavioral questions and also to put the availability of a senior team to listen to the interviewee according to the seniority that is required. It costs a lot for a company to have all these layers of time involved for to interview a person. And then there is the human side that says, oh, David has long hair. He looks like the type of leadership style. Like he's tall. Oh, he's the type of people that people will follow. So there is a lot of biases in human beings. It is a tedious process. So I was wondering, what if, for instance, do you believe on the fact that somebody may download the PDF of your next book that explain what these are the steps of behavioral interviews that you need to follow? They put it in the AI. The AI proposes a set of questions that are related to, I don't know, the values of the company. Is that something that is feasible? Can we trust AI to remove the human biases and to focus on what could be really doing, or this guy is just repeating what the other chatbot told him?
Well, here's the problem. You can rely on the AI to give you 80% of the information, but you've got to review it yourself and correct the AI's mistakes because AI is not perfect. Number two, Amazon put together AI for a resume system to
Yep.
review resumes. And part of the problem was they're not getting enough female candidates.
I
They always
really.
had male candidates. So they were hoping that AI with their, scanning system would give them the most objective candidate, regardless of male or female. And it turned out they were getting just male candidates,
Holy.
or mostly. Why? Because the resumes of successful candidates they fed into AI were mostly men,
Ah,
and men were programming the AI. I've discovered a list of about 30 different organizations that have used AI for everything from scheduling to performance reviews to other things, and they've had nothing but trouble with it. You
huh.
got to remember, AI is in its infancy.
Yep.
AI still has a lot of problems. AI is the shining star on the hill, and everybody's running to it. I do believe too fast. You still have to have that human touch. And if I know how to conduct a behavioral interview, and if I have a panel interview, which is more accurate than one-on-one interview, with everybody involved that has to make that hiring decision at one time, I can make that hiring decision within a week of completing the interviews,
Mm.
or even before, because I know exactly what I'm looking for. Everybody involved's been together. They have a meeting to reach consensus on the candidates, and they make a decision together. Now, here's the other thing that you have to have. Got to remember, who gets blamed for bad hires? HR and the recruiter.
Yeah, very often.
Who takes credit for good hires? The hiring manager. I say that you have to remember that once that person's hired, the objective, the goal, the measurement for the manager's success becomes retention. And as soon as the manager knows they, not HR, had to make the hiring decision, they, not HR, had to retain that person, their relationship and commitment to that person changes. So that gets back to what you said earlier. What happens when you outsource hiring? You outsource hiring to somebody that maybe is hiring for your competitor, hiring for other similar companies.
Mm.
They just want to throw something at the wall till it sticks so they get paid. They don't know your culture. They never lived in your organization. You can tell them what the value behaviors are. They don't know the nuance of it. And even then, the hiring manager still has to interview that last candidate. So it's very interesting that, and people have said that doing virtual interviews has, taken away some of the bias. And it's true. For instance, you will know that I'm 6'3",
No,
and
we.
there's a prejudice to hire taller people. So it does take away that bias. However, there's still bias involved. Let's say the internet has a bad connection
Mm.
and you don't hear me clearly, and therefore you're annoyed. Well, you associate that annoyance with my interview. You associate misinformation with that. The Garfield cartoon behind me says stubborn because I'm stubborn. It represents me. All right. So, especially when I was an educator. So the reality is maybe you read that and you don't like people who are stubborn. There's things going on. I was talking to one of my clients in Scotland who said during the pandemic, they interviewed online and virtually using Zoom. And because the flats are very small, and people are customer service reps, they realize people that if it was in person, they might have hired them, but because of the kind of arrangements they had at home, they couldn't hire them. It wouldn't be a good reflection of their business. So, and I worked with the Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, years ago, and it would be very expensive to send their team all over the world to hire MBAs. So they started using FaceTime
Mm.
to do virtual interviews before it was popular. And they would hire people and they'd bring them to Jeddah at a great expense because they had to fly them, they had to put them up. Sometimes second interview, if they were successful, they brought their wife over. It was very expensive. And they get there and they realize, oh my God, I should have never even considered this person. Because there's things you can do in a virtual interview to give you a positive advantage as well as a disadvantage that you can't do in person. So the extreme of this is the London Symphony a number of years ago. They were hiring only male orchestra members, vast majority. And they said women can play the instrument as well, if not better than men. We have to make this so it's an unbiased interview. What are we going to do? Brilliant idea. The candidates will be behind the curtain and the panel will be on the other side of the curtain, and they won't know if it's a male or female. And what happened? The majority of people hired were males. Why? Because people listened to the footsteps and understood if it was a male or a female, and the prejudice kicked in.
Yes.
So what did they do in the next round? They put a carpet out. They told people to take their shoes off. Now it was a blind decision, and they hired more females. Now, we can't do that when we hire people because the hiring manager is going to see that person, whether it's virtually or in person, and they're going to have that prejudice. But if you use proper behavioral interviewing and you take good notes and you compare the person's answer to what you're looking for, whether you like the person or not, if the person did what they did, somebody on the panel is going to hold you accountable to it. And the other thing that I always say when I train people, I have a 2-day behavioral interviewing course, which is very experiential. When I train people to it, I say, we are all prejudiced. I don't care if you're not prejudiced, except my mother, as she got older, said, I'm prejudiced. I said, Mom, you're a civil rights leader. What do you mean you're prejudiced? She says, I hate all people.
That's exactly like me, David. I say the same.
I hate all people. So I said, yeah, great. That's not the way you acted all my life. You don't confuse me. So the reason is, well, let's put it on the table. I always ask, to show people their prejudice, I ask a question. I come in the interview, I'm usually dressed in my suit and tie. In the old days now, I wear very nice casual clothing. And I say to the group right up front, what kind of car do I drive? And they give me answers. And I say, you're giving me answers based on your prejudice. You're giving me answers based on, I'm a management consultant who's
Mhm.
written 2 books, who has a doctorate, who lives in a nice neighborhood, who traveled the world, who's fairly well recognized in the community. And so you're making assumptions. And then I say to them, I drive a 2005 Volvo. And they're shocked. And I
Yeah.
said, it's a safe car. It doesn't cost me any money to repair. It costs me less money to repair than a new car would cost to buy. It gets me safely from point A to point B. And that's the purpose of a car. I don't have to impress anybody. I want to get from point A to point B safely and take my grandchildren safely from point A to point B. So I like my car. I'm comfortable with it. And they go, oh, so we're all prejudiced. What is your prejudice? The joke was when I was talking to one of my clients and they said, well, the pandemic with virtual interviews has put me at a disadvantage. I said, why? So, well, people don't know you're tall anymore and they have a tendency to hire taller people. I said, yeah, you're right. It's made it a level playing field. So in some ways there's an advantage, but we're all prejudiced. We all have an issue. And I've seen it so many times. I've seen in corporations where they would send out to hire MBA students and you'd look and all those MBA students are hired from the same school that person graduated from.
Mhm. Indeed.
And I said, wait a second, aren't there other MBA schools that are just as good, if not better? Oh, no. And then they say, and many years ago, they say, we want to hire the best engineers. We want to hire the people that graduated top in their class. And I would say, that's really interesting. Have you ever gone to a doctor? Oh, yeah, I love my physician. Have you ever asked them where they graduated in their school? They might have been the school person that graduated last in medical school. And what do you call the person who graduated last in medical school? Doctor.
Yes.
But you like them because they have the right personality, they have good bedside manner,
Mhm.
but they graduated last in school. So with the guy who's in charge of your life, takes care of your health, who graduated last in school, that's okay. But your engineer, you want the top guy? Maybe the guy in the middle of the class is a better engineer.
Indeed. David, I wanted to start discussing about your new book because I think it's very important and for people to know that they are going to find a lot of good ways to conduct this type of interviews. Can you tell me a little bit more? When do you have it ready? And what is the name of this book?
The course that I've always taught over the years and I've been refining this course for 30 years because I learn from my clients and I learn from the experiences they have and I integrate the new learning into the course. The course has always been called Selecting the Best. So I call the book Selecting the Best. And the book is based on a case study of $1 billion brand new plant, a greenfield plant, $1 billion petrochemical plant in Corpus Christi, Texas.
Oh,
And the plant, the company that developed the plant put together an executive team, and they hadn't even really begun building the plant yet, but they put this executive team together, and the general manager was convinced by the head of HR that the best way of doing this is understanding what is the culture, what's going to make people get along to make this successful. So I was honored to be asked to come down and work with them on developing it. So the book follows this case study of what are the values, what are the behaviors. So the book says, how do you identify what the authentic behaviors of the organization are? And how do you write them behaviorally, not as outcomes, not as respect or this or that or the other thing, but as actual title of the value, but the behaviors that define the value for this organization. Then what I did when they had to hire the first 100 people, I taught them behavioral interviewing with interviewing for the skill and knowledge and interviewing for the behaviors that fit the values. And in one of the first interviews, the general manager, who'd been very successful and extremely intelligent, extremely personable gentleman, had always said to me, I know how to hire, I've been very successful, and I know what I'm looking for, I know what I want, and we'll see if this helps. First day of interviewing, we're debriefing, and he says, I'm recommending somebody that, according to the resume, I would have never even interviewed because he doesn't have the specific engineering degree I'm looking for. But he has other engineering degrees. And as you said, knowledge and behaviors are transferable. So I interviewed him and realized he has all the right values. And I'll have plenty of time to teach him all the engineering stuff he needs to know.
hmm.
And they hired him. He was they hired 100, out of the 100 people they had hired, they hired 102 because they figured some people are going to say no. 102 people accepted the job. A year later, only 2 left. One because of a family issue and one because he didn't fit.
Hmm.
During the discovery of the values with the leadership team, I went to the general manager, the head of the plant, and I said, you've got a member of your team that doesn't work, doesn't belong here. He doesn't have the values and the behaviors that the rest of the team has. And he says, I've always thought that. And I said, who do you think it is? I'm not going to tell you. I want to make sure we're thinking the same person. He mentioned the same person. And I coached him on how to talk to him about it. And the gentleman left a month later because he realized he wasn't going to be successful.
Hmm.
Now, here's the interesting part of the story. Unfortunately, they had to stop building the plant, and the plant went into bankruptcy. And I don't go into details on that. It's an unfortunate, tragic story. And it went into bankruptcy. And then it was a conglomerate of organizations bought it, and they rebuilt it, started rebuilding it.
Mm.
So they said, we had already hired some very good people. Let's see if they want to come back. Now, they're in Corpus Christi, Texas. For instance, one of the gentlemen had moved to Seattle, Washington, which, based on geography and culture and everything else, Seattle, Washington is the complete opposite of Corpus Christi, Texas. And they said, would you like to come back? He took the job at a 25% cut in pound salary.
Hola. Okay.
And I asked him why,
Important
and
it
he
is.
said, because I've worked in the military. I've worked for major oil companies. I have never been treated the way I've always wanted to be treated. And this leadership team treats me the way I want to be treated. That's more important. They
Hmm.
hired back 10 people at a cut in salary
Hmm.
that came geographically on their own back to Corpus Christi
Hmm.
because the culture, the values of the organization drew them back. So it's like, if you do this right, they will come. If you do this right, you'll find the people that are going to make you better. They're going to make you look good. They're going to give, as I say, I say to some senior leaders, they'll give you more time to play golf because they're doing their job so you can do yours. And it happens all the time. So getting the values defined behaviorally that are the authentic values and learning how to interview for fit to those avoids you from getting those viruses and avoids you from getting deadwood. You might get keepers because you put them in the wrong job, but it's easier to teach them skill and knowledge and get them to be stars.
Hmm.
So
Uh,
it's a powerful process.
David, so in how long time will this book is going to be live?
My publisher said it was supposed to be live in February. It looks like it's going to be middle of March, but
Okay.
it should be on Amazon by the end of this month.
Yeah. Perfect. That is a book that I'm looking forward to read.
Thank you.
David, if I understand correctly, if people wants to reach you out, we can use LinkedIn to contact you if they have
LinkedIn,
questions to you.
or the website is www.sagltd.com. You
Uh-huh.
reach me there.
Okay.
And, I always answer. I'm a teacher. So I believe the more information you share, the more you get back. So unlike consultants or lawyers, I'm never putting together a timesheet. If people have a question, it's my pleasure to answer it because I learn from their questions. So I'm always open for discussion.
And by the way, since the moment I have started following you, I see that you are consistent in producing certain publications or certain articles, which are very interesting and goes in
Thank
line
you.
with what you mentioned about sharing.
Thank you. Yes.
I will be putting all these, both of the links in the below this recording. David, it was such a pleasure to discuss with you. It
Pleasure,
was
pleasure to talk to
like
you, and hopefully we'll meet in person someday.
exactly. Come to Switzerland.
I'd love to. Get me invited.
Thank you, David. Have an
Thank
excellent
you.
day.
Have a good day. Thank you for your time.